Welcome back, and on this third and final installation of News Check this morning, we are looking at the cervical cancer, and more specifically, January is always regarded as the World Cervical Cancer Month. A number of events and also just plow back and see where we are as a country in matters, and also as a world in matters cervical cancer. And to help us drive this conversation, I have Dr. Aurora Maranga from the Kenyatta National Hospital. Daktari, karibu sana.
Asante sana.
And very fast, what is cervical cancer, and how does it develop for the people who would want to know exactly how it happens?
Thank you, and we appreciate your invitation.
You're welcome.
Cervical cancer is basically cancer of the reproductive system. When you look at the part of female reproductive system, we have the cervix, which is basically the entrance to the womb. So that particular part of the reproductive system tends to develop cancer a lot. And cancer of the cervix is very, very common. It's actually one of the commonest. If you look in this country and most sub-Saharan Africa, it ranges either number 1 or number 2, interchangeable with breast cancer. And this month is being commemorated, and has been the case for the past few years, worldwide as Cancer Month, that is January. And that's really what I could say on that. And if you look at the development of cervical cancer, it's usually associated with a virus, which we call human papilloma virus, which I hope later we are going to talk about it, and which also has a vaccine. And of note is cervical cancer is 100% preventable. If it can be detected early, if we can use vaccinations, and basically chastity, so to speak. Yeah.
And what are the common symptoms of cervical cancer?
The common symptoms, one could look at it like, is this lady pre-menopause, that's before 50 years or thereabout, or after menopause? For those ones who have gone into menopause, they tend to have what you call post-menopausal bleeding. That is bleeding. You find a lady stopped having their irregular periods, they've stayed a variable number of times, and then they start having bleeding again. So in other instances, one could think that they're actually having resumption of the menses, and but obviously it is because there's a problem there. So that is one of the commonest. And talking about that particular aspect, there is a lot of delay, because an older lady may develop those symptoms, and because of traditions and culture, taboos, she is not able to tell her children or her daughters, or maybe just anybody else. So by the time they come to a hospital, it's rather late. That is for the post-menopause, or those who have gone through menopause. Otherwise, for those ones before menopause, they could have irregular bleeding, irregular, what they may think it's prolonged periods, or irregular cycles, so to speak, or even bleeding during or after contact with the partners. And sometimes they could also develop discharge from the birth canal, which is mostly foul smelling. When the disease is more advanced, they could develop now other symptoms like low abdominal pains, low back pains, and basically discomfort when passing stool or passing urine. So it depends. But I must add, really, and that is the point of emphasis, that very early cervical cancer has no symptoms. So somebody may actually be feeling quite okay, almost 100%, and there's cancer which is developing. So there are no symptoms for very early cancer, and that's why we advocate that people should go for screening. You go for screening not because you have symptoms per se, but because it's the right thing to do, and that's the best time when it can be detected and cured.
And it's a good thing that you brought about the issue of screening, because like with any cancer, early detection and regular screening are very important, especially when it comes to cervical cancer. How important is it for regular screening?
We cannot
And the
overemphasize
frequency.
that. Yeah, the frequency, it's been annual checkup. As part of annual checkup, women would usually go to the hospitals or to their doctors, and then they are done cervical cancer screening. Previously, we were using other methods, which we still use in other instances, like pap smear. Pap smear is when you take a brush and we remove some cells from the cervix, and they are checked in the laboratory. It may be a little bit uncomfortable, but it's definitely not painful. And that's one of the things which keeps off some women, because they have heard it's a very painful procedure, so they don't come for screening. Of late, we are having, and that's now the trend, checking for this virus, which we are calling human papilloma virus. So instead of doing the pap smear, now there's advocacy to check for what actually causes the cancer. And that now, for those who are able to do HPV screening, repeat the test after around 3 to 5 years. But for regular pap smear, usually at least we start with annual.
And how can women reduce the risk of this disease? And more specifically, when you talk about the HPV vaccine, the human papilloma virus screening?
Yeah, thank you. Now, the HPV has been proven to be the cause of cervical cancer. And it is actually sexually transmitted. It's one of those organisms which are sexually transmitted, but they have no symptoms whatsoever. It is so common. But then we don't like emphasizing on that bit, because then it stigmatizes people who actually have cervical cancer. The truth about HPV is that it's very easily transmissible. If you take a cohort, or a generation for that matter, and then you follow them up to the age of 60 years, and you check throughout their lives, you may find that almost 90% of them, they had a brush with HPV. So they may have had that virus during that time. The difference is most of them, that's almost 90 and 95%, they would eliminate it from their system. So their immunity is able to basically eliminate it. But then 5%, 3 to 5% of people, they're unable to do that. So we have persistent HPV infection. Now, these are the ones who, unfortunately, unless detected early, they develop cervical cancer. So let's not stigmatize those who have cervical cancer, that that it is sexually transmitted. It may be so, but it's not a moral issue. It's basically they were unlucky to have a persistency of HPV. And HPV as it is, one can have infection now and then develop cancer almost 15, 20 years later. So it's not something like, say, gonorrhea or chlamydia, where somebody is exposed this week and almost immediately they develop symptoms. This is a very silent disease. And for men, it tends to be more passive, so more of carriers, so to speak. Although even in men, it can actually cause problems like penile cancer or anal cancer or throat cancer, depending on sexual practices. And that's very common in the West.
And it's a good thing that you've mentioned some misconception and myths which are there in regards to this, to cervical cancer. How do we address this? Because the stigmatization that you've mentioned is still there.
It's still there, and I think it's mostly education and information, like what we're doing right now, and I want to commend KBC and other media in this country. On last Friday, we had a media briefing, and that was spearheaded by the Cabinet Secretary. That was at Pan-Africa Hotel, where we attended. So such meetings and dissemination of such information, and all of us, basically, we are all stakeholders, be it in the church, be it in schools, and it's something which we are pushing for it to be included in the school curricula, so that it's actually, as pupils go through school, they are aware about their health. And that is why, like in most countries, including this country, there's HPV vaccination. which is available from the age of 9 to the age of 14. But anybody can actually get, any lady should ideally get that.
And it's good that you mentioned the HPV vaccine. How does it work? Is it a one-off, or when should we are talking about small girls who are mostly given the, or even older people can get the vaccine?
It's available. It's available for everybody. But there's a government initiative which targets 9 to 15-year-old girls. But for anybody or any lady who has not been exposed to the HPV, then it is still beneficial. So in other words, initially we used to talk of below 50 years, but that is from the manufacturer's point of view. But from a public point of view, public health point of view, it is basically below the age of 30, 35. It is still beneficial. Now, coming back to the question of how many shots or how many injections to be given, initially it used to be given 3 doses. It's given like day 1, and then it's repeated after 1 month, and then at 6 months. Then it was noted that most people are missing the one of 6 months, as would have been expected, or, because of forgetting and such like. So studies have been done, and they have actually shown that those 2 doses are as good as the 3 doses. So there's a push towards having at least the 2 doses being given, that is given at time 0 and then repeated after 1 month, and it is lifelong. So it doesn't have to be given every year, and it's very safe. Yeah. And
how well is the country prepared to deal with cervical cancer? And maybe to bring this to your purview, the Kenyatta National Hospital, how prepared are you in dealing with cervical cancer?
Preparedness, it is all of us as a country in terms of are we screening the people from the ground? Are we referring them in the right way to the right places? Are we reducing delays in diagnosis and also delays in instituting management? And if you look at the whole continuum of care, there are challenges, definitely. You can't pretend that there are no challenges. But I think as a country we've come a long way in terms of even talking about cervical cancer screening, and there are a lot of elaborate programs which are given through the government in terms of countering and treatment of cervical cancer. Yeah. And
because we're talking about this month, which has been set aside by the whole world in looking at where we've gone and the steps that we have been able to accomplish in regards to cervical cancer, what are some of the, let's say, events that the Ministry of maybe the Health or even Kenyatta National Hospital has organized in regards to this, and more so in regards to the awareness, because that's where it all begins?
Yeah. I'm aware there are several events which have been happening. The different facilities have been doing different events, screening, including churches, including hospitals. But at a national level, as I mentioned, there was just last week a media briefing on Cervical Cancer Month organized by the Ministry of Health, including the National Cancer Control Program. That was one. At Kenyatta National Hospital, next week, we have lined up many patients for surgery. So we are having what we call a gynecologic oncology surgical camp. What basically this means is we've been doing a lot of screening for cervical cancer. There are those who are due, who need to be done surgery, and because of the numbers, the high numbers, we noted that if you have to book them the usual way, then we are going to spread them out. They'll have a long waiting time, even up to around 3-4 months. So we decided that next week we are actually going to dedicate next week for these patients, so that we are able to operate on all of them. next week, those who are already diagnosed and lined up for the surgeries. So that is one of the events which are lined up, and we've had a lot of support from partners in that regard.
And from where you sit, what are some of the challenges of managing cancer, and more specifically cervical cancer in the country, other than issues like misconception and myths?
Thank you. The commonest issue is delay in instituting definitive treatment. What I mean by that is there are different types of delay. The delay may come from myself as a patient. So I noticed that there's this abnormal aspect of my body. There's maybe a discharge as a woman, that is, or there's this abnormal bleeding and such like. But then as a woman, I don't go to seek help. Or instead of seeking the right help, I go for maybe traditional herbs and whatnot. So that is already delaying. By the time probably I go to the hospital, I've spent like 2-3 months procrastinating and not getting the right treatment. And maybe there's also delay at the health facilities, where maybe it takes time to make the diagnosis and to refer accordingly to the right people who are able to manage. The other aspect is it takes time to the turnaround time for some of these investigations. You do a pap smear, for example, and you're not able to get the result immediately. Somebody is told to come after around 5 weeks or 4 weeks to pick your result. That takes toll. So if we are able as a country to tackle these delays, so that if somebody notices at their own personal level that they have abnormal symptoms, they come to the hospital, we attend to them on time, we institute treatment immediately, yes, we'll be able to.
And finally, as we wind up, the cost of cancer treatment in the country is on the higher side. Is it the same case when it comes to the treatment and management of cervical cancer?
Yeah, it is. Because it's part of the, we use the same facilities. If you're talking about surgery, we use the same theaters. If it's chemotherapy, we use the same spectrum of medication. If it's radiotherapy, we use the same facilities. So cancer treatment, yes, it is true. It is quite expensive for the common mwananchi in this country. And there are many patients who are not able to go through the treatment because they are not able to pay for that particular treatment. But of note is there have been efforts, to be fair, with the government over the years. We've seen a lot of changes over the last, I've been practicing oncology, that's cancer treatment, for the last 15 or so years. And from where I'm seated, there's been a lot of significant change in the management of cancers in this country. We are not there yet, but at least we are somewhere.
Your final words, Dr. Maranga?
Final word is basically to go back to where we started. Cervical cancer is 100% preventable, and it's curable only if it is gotten early. So I want to urge Kenyans, basically, if you're a lady, go for this cancer screening. As a man, get your partner to go for screening. Let's get our daughters to have the vaccination. It's something which we'll never regret. And for those patients who are going through the treatment or have just been diagnosed with cervical cancer, cancer treatment is not a death sentence. There's treatment even for stage 4 disease, and we'll urge you to continue the treatment and follow up with your doctors. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That has been Dr. Aurora Maranga, who is a consultant gynecologist and gynecologic oncologist at the Kenyatta National Hospital. They are putting on the lens matters cervical cancer. Remember, in January, we celebrate the World Cancer Month with a scope of actually viewing how we have been moving in terms of cancer management in the country. And for this special case, the cervical cancer screening, as you have said, it's preventable. There's treatment. There's also hope. Many thanks indeed for joining us for News Check. This from 10 a.m. till now. I'm now giving the baton to my Kiswahili co-anchor for Kurunzi Mashinani and Tamrini. Many thanks indeed for joining. My name is Bentra Njue. We started out with Anne Wangeshi as our sign language interpreter. Right now we have the lady Susan Thuku, who is handling the sign language interpretation. Do have yourself a blessed afternoon ahead.